Yesterday we did a little bit of the tone mapping on the photomatic side, but now this time around what we're going to do is we're going to talk about HDR Efex Pro and what I like about that and how I think how that is sometimes a little bit better.
So what's, excuse me again, what's all to add this picture for Max Pro?
We're going to be using HDR Efex Pro from Nik software.
Okay, I'm going to use that now.
Okay. All right. So now let's go ahead and do this. Let me go ahead and minimize this real quick. All right. So now here we are. So I'm inside of Lightroom. Can you guys see my Lightroom?
Yes.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. So we're inside of Lightroom, and what we have here is we have one image that I'm working with. So this is the file that I started with, and basically I took a bracket set of images for this, but I only used one of the brackets because, to be frank, I took the shot and it sucked. Right? It was I'm actually standing in front of a gate, and it's like a wire fence, and you couldn't get any closer than you needed to. And this is in Bodie. It's a ghost town in California. So a lot of this place is locked up. So you can't get really, really close. So I stuck my lens right through the fence and I rested it on one of the arms of the gate, or one of the holes in the gate. And I fired off a couple shots. So right off the bat, I'm looking at it. I'm going, all right, well, I can't get 3 shots because 3 shots are going to be hard for me to be able to kind of hold still without a tripod. But I'll try to tone map 1 shot. If you zoom into the file, you'll see it's like, it's okay. It's kind of all right. It's not bad. If we look at the develop settings for this, you know, I'm shooting at a 30th of a second at f6.3 at around 400 ISO. If I had to do it over again, I probably would have gone to 1600 ISO and tried to see if I can get a better bracket. But, you know, sometimes it's just not going to happen. You got to work with what you got. Now, from here, this is a very, very far cry from here to here. If you take a look at these two, those are very, very different files. So even though we used just one file, tone mapping, you can actually eke out a lot of detail from that. So that's the benefit of what we want to be able to do here. I want to be able to show you guys how to be able to do this with one file, and I want to be able to show you how to do this using a different piece of software, and software that I tend to prefer to use in these instances from Nik software called HDR Efex Pro. Now, the best way for you to be able to think about this, or actually, while I'll do this, before we're doing that, you can right click on this, you can go to export, and you can go to HDR Efex Pro under the list. You can't, you guys can see it. The recording is not going to be able to see it under the capture line. But that's one way for you to be able to get to it. If you have the standalone version, you can actually fire up the standalone version, and inside of this, you can go to File and Open Exposure Series and do it that way. So you don't necessarily have to do it from inside of Lightroom. You don't have to do it from inside of Photoshop. You can also do it from a standalone. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and I'm just going to open up HDR Efex Pro. I'm going to let it process. Think of it this way. Whenever you're processing an HDR file is basically a algorithm. It's a math algorithm that takes one file or a series of files and merges them together to be able to maximize tonality. So Photomatix has one way for them to be able to do this. They have their secret sauce of how to be able to process it. Their formula is going to be very, very different from, let's say, the formula that you would use in Photoshop, right? Because they're competing software companies, so they're going to have different ways to be able to do it. Yesterday I made the analogy that it's much in the same space of how different guitars sound differently, right? You can have a guitar that sounds like a Metallica sound, a heavy metal sound. You can have a guitar that sounds like B.B. King. You can have a guitar that sounds like a flamenco sound. Different guitars have different types of sounds. Same way as HDR. HDR software from different companies or different people have different types of algorithms because they're different companies. And because they have differences like that, it's not that one is necessarily better than another. It's that one sounds different than another. It has a different signature. It has a different flavor. It has a different feel. Is everybody cool with that so far?
Yep.
Okay. Now, one of the reasons that I happen to like HDR Efex Pro is one thing right here. It's this HDR Methods section right here on the right. If you follow the analogy that Photomatix has its own signature and Photoshop has its own signature, for me, HDR Efex Pro wins because when you click on this drop down, you have all of these different ways to be able to tone map a file. So it's almost kind of like you have all of these different signatures that you can use. So just on the sheer numbers, I'd rather have more than one way to do it than one way to do it. So for me, that right off the bat, that helps. But we'll talk about this in a second. When you come in here on when you first start, you'll notice that there's a preset section and there's a custom section. Preset section gives you a set of presets. And if you just click through them, you can see this is one way to work it. This is another way to work it. This is another way to work it. This is another way to work it. Right? There's nothing really that much to it. So I'm not going to talk about the presets. You can also have your own presets and put them in the custom section. You'll notice those are all my presets. But really, that's not the important part. So we'll go ahead and we'll just turn that off. We'll just go to the file. Now, the key here is this part right here. You have this section right here. Oh, actually here, let me do this. Let's bring you back to presets and let's just go to the default. This is what it looks like when you first start. So you have a natural preset, a method strength of 0, and a tone compression of 0. Everything is zeroed out. Right off the bat, the first thing that I usually do in HDR Efex Pro is bring up the method strength. So it's almost kind of like the intensity. That gives me a specific effect. If I want to be able to compress a tone in a file, you'll notice that I can drag this to the right and that adjusts what I'm seeing here in this one section. So if you think of it this way, when you work with several files in HDR, what you're doing is you're merging all of these files together and you're creating this almost super file that has all of this different tonal range. But it has this range that's a really, really big range that you can't see with a normal monitor. You know, we talked about this in a different hangout. We said the HDR file, the actual technical HDR file that you create has so much tone that your monitor can't see it, your printer can't see it, you can't do anything with it. So with an HDR file, what you do is what you're doing in actuality is you're taking the file and you're compressing it and you're taking the tones that you can't see and you're mapping them into the tones that you can see. That's all tone mapping is, and that's the art form of tone mapping. How that happens is with that formula. So how much tone is compressed is gauged by this slider. A variance of how you play with this stuff, the strength of it is measured during the method strength. Now, here's the trick. More often than not, anybody who's doing HDR, I don't care who it is, you don't have a science for how to be able to use these two. This and this largely depend on your taste. How much you go on this way versus this way is going to be entirely up to you. What you'll understand, though, is that as you increase your method strength, sometimes you'll find yourself using your tone compression as almost kind of like a counter lever. So you'll increase this strength, you'll see that it gets really, really messed up. You'll decrease your tone compression. If you bring both of them to big extremes, your results might not necessarily be very, very cool. That make sense?
Yep.
Okay, so it's all a question of counter levers. Here's my favorite part. Let's say, for example, I have a tone compression of 38 and I have a method strength of 42. So we're sitting right in the middle and I'm using a natural setting. This is one flavor of HDR. However, what if I don't like this flavor? What if I want to try something different? If I go to the HDR method, I'm going to click on the drop down. I'm going to select clean. That's a very, very different file from natural. Look at the details that you're getting here and here. Right? So I'll just bring this up and just kind of bring that one spot there. Now, go to natural. See what it does here? Go to clean. Now watch this. If you go to crisp, or if you go to halo reduction, in some of those instances, it's almost as if you have a completely different HDR software experience. This looks very different from this, which looks very different from this. So what I like about this right off the bat is that if I find myself playing with this tone compression and this method strength and I don't like the look of what I'm doing in one method, I'll automatically come over here and switch to another method. When I get to that method, I'll go back and I'll do the same thing over again. I'll play with the method strength and I'll play with the tone compression to see if I can get a different feeling for that file. If I don't like this, I'm going to click on this again, and I'm going to continue to go through all of the different methods. Watch this. I'm going to go over here. I'm going to go to harsh details. That's very different from where we started on the natural side. Is everybody okay with that so far?
Yep.
Cool.
Yeah.
So there's a bunch of different methods for you to be able to think of. Take a look at bright textures. You see how it almost kind of makes this really, really weird right here? And then if you go over here, you go to textured, darkens up the image. For me, I find myself, and this is just a stylistic choice, I find myself living a lot under the dark soft section. I don't know why, that's just kind of where I go all the time. So I'll play with my method strength, I'll play with my tone compression, and I'll kind of get it where I want it. Once that's done, the next step that I usually do is I work with exposure and structure. I don't play with contrast too much. I find that the image right now is a little bit too bright. So I'm going to grab the exposure and just drag it over to the left. Now this is beginning to have that moody look that I'm looking for. Structure is like an awesome slider. Structure just gives you really cool detail in different spots. Watch this. Structure. You know, there's a great way to be able to explain what it's doing from an edge contrast, but I don't really care. It's just an awesome slider. I grab it and I drag it over the right and it makes things look cool. So those are the two that I generally work with from here. And give me a little bit of detail. Probably a little bit too much detail. I'll tone off that a little bit. Now, the color right now sucks. But I'm not going to worry about the color right now because, again, a lot of the times what I tell people from an HDR standpoint is HDR is not necessarily, for me, it's not necessarily about color, at least not initially. For me, HDR is a lot about tone. If I can get a tone, if I can get texture and tonality, that's more important. This color can be fixed in 2 seconds in post. So I'm not going to worry about it right now. There are some tools to be able to fix it. Like right now, I could go under saturation and drop my saturation, and that makes an awesome black and white. I can double click the slider and bring it right back to its 0 point. All I'm looking for is a good overall feel for the file. If I need to, I'll eke in a little bit of blacks just to kind of get a little bit more shadow detail. A lot of the times I tell people, make sure that you include a lot of shadows in what it is that you're working with. Shadows are very, very important. So this is beginning to look like it's okay. All of this stuff is just to taste after you find the HDR method that you like and you find the right balance between tone compression and method strength that's going to suit you. This cool so far?
Cool.
Okay. Now, the next section. Sometimes I use this, sometimes I don't. So I go back and forth. It's a great thing to use. I just tend to do a lot of it in Photoshop, but I like the fact that it's here if I need it. This selective adjustment section. Nik software has this thing that allows you to be able to add control points to an image so you can actually do a lot of your finishing effects right here. If you wanted to, you could technically finish this entire file right inside of HDR Efex Pro. Take a look. I'm going to grab this dot here, and I can go right over a file. And let's just say, for example, I want to be able to take this portion of the image. I'm going to click it and let it go. It drops this dot, and this first slider, if I click it, it shows me a size. This is how much of that area is going to be affected. Now, under that, you have a series of sliders. Exposure, if you hover over it, contrast, hover over it, saturation. You can even get more sliders by clicking on the drop down. Exposure, contrast, saturation, structure, blacks, whites, warmth, method strength, and then the overall size thing. So watch this. If I wanted to be able to take this and I wanted to make it darker, notice that it's only doing it to that region. If I grab this and I make the region bigger, I can even take that dot and move it around. Let's say if I move that dot over here, watch what happens. If I move it over here, watch what happens. So it's doing this localized adjustment to that one region based on this size, which I think is kind of neat. Right? It'll keep a set of dots over here. If I want to add a second dot, I can go, you know what? I want this part right here darker. So it's kind of like a what you see is what you get. You're telling it, look, go into this one spot, make this darker. Add another dot. Come over here. Take this spot, make it brighter. No, actually, I didn't want that brighter. I wanted this organ brighter right here. Make that a little bit bigger. And now don't make that so bright. Just a little tiny bit. But I want you to take this dot, put a dot right here. I want you to make this size a lot bigger. And I want you to take this and I want you to drop the exposure. And I want you to drop the structure so that it's not as contrasty. Maybe this spot right here, I'm going to add one more control point over here, and I'm going to drop the saturation in that one section. So by just dropping these pins, drop a pin, drop a pin, drop a pin, drop a pin, you can do all of the work that you want to do. I think that's actually kind of cool. So at any point in time, if you want to get rid of them, you can just click on one of them, hit delete, click, delete. You can actually click on the point itself too if you want. Click on it, delete, and you can delete all those pins. But that's definitely something worth checking out. That okay with everybody so far?
Yeah, I had a question for you. I'm typing it in chat there.
Sure,
Yeah,
sure.
What's talk to you?
Yeah.
How is it when you put those different control points? Because I use this software as well for editing mine, and what I've never really used control points because I didn't know how it dealt with noise in each specific control point and how to back that out and get rid of some of that noise. Because I don't know with you guys, but a lot of my HDRs come up a little bit noisy, even if I shoot at a low ISO. So I wasn't sure if each control point was easy to control noise at, or if it still controls noise out of your post in like Photoshop.
It's still, you're still controlling a lot of your noise out of post. I'm still controlling it afterwards. I don't find that the control points add an incredible amount of noise, so I don't worry about it. But that said, I don't necessarily push and pull exposure a lot on the HDR file with control points. So my noise tends to be very, very easy. Very even, I mean.
And you were shooting this with the D3S?
I was shooting this with the D3S. Oh no, with the D700. You see right here at the bottom? D700.
Oh, it's too small for me to say.
Oh, sorry, yeah. It was a D700.
Okay.
Other than that, everybody doing okay?
Actually, I don't know if you wanna address this question now or later, but I had one earlier. Basically, like, do you ever find yourself going into Photoshop to use HDR Efex Pro?
I do sometimes. But the only time that I usually use, I do a lot of my processing inside of Lightroom for HDR Efex Pro. The only time that I use it inside of Photoshop is if I have a separate raw HDR file, like a 32-bit HDR file, or if I need to be able to kind of create a, if I need to be able to block ghosting, I'll merge all of my stuff inside of HDR, inside of Photoshop. And then once I make the 32-bit image, then I go in and I do the HDR Efex Pro plugin from there.
Oh, I see. Okay.
But it's not really, it's 6 of one, half a dozen of the other, really. Justin has a question. He says, do you run any noise reduction in your individual bracketed files before you start the HDR tone mapping? No, I don't. Because think of it this way. Sometimes noise, texture can be, I find that texture can sometimes be confused for noise. So what happens is, if you try to be able to run noise against a set of files, it'll remove unwanted texture. So that's one thing. The second thing is, if you're shooting a wide bracket, let's say you shoot a 7-shot bracket or an 8-shot bracket, sometimes when you're looking at a file and you're -3 on the file, you're not going to see a lot of detail. You're not going to see that there is a lot of noise. So it would be counterintuitive for you to run noise reduction on a file that's so dark that you don't know that it has that noise to begin with. So for me, I find that it's a lot easier for me to be able to run my noise in post. So I have this file. Is everybody cool with the selective adjustments thing?
Yeah.
Okay. Now from here, the other thing that I think is really cool is this part right here on the finishing adjustments. Finishing adjustments gives you a lot of stuff where you can just finish color, tonality, vignettes and things like that right inside of this one section. So for example, if I wanted to make a vignette, I can come over here, click on the vignette. If I want to make it darker, click on this vignette. Under the details section, you can click on this drop down and you can control how much of that vignette you actually have, how strong that transition is, the size of that vignette, and whether or not the vignette is a circle or a rectangle. You also have the option to be able to take that and you can place the center of the vignette to be able to change it. Come back over here, place it, come back over here, place it. For me, I'm not going to use a vignette here because I'm going to do that as part of the finishing section for me later in Photoshop. But it's nice to know that it's there. The other thing that I think is really, really cool is that they give you this section here for levels and curves. Under levels and curves, you can put in a specific kind of curve to be able to do something. Or you can go ahead and come over here and actually make a tonal curve, much like you could in an adjustment layer inside of HDR Efex Pro. Even better still, you have the option to be able to take these and you can do these on a per color basis. So if you wanted to be able to get rid of a color shift, you could just go into a specific color and drop a curve point and it can pull off some of these colors. I think it's a nice thing to be able to have, and you can do a lot of that finishing right from here. For me, I still find myself that I use this a little bit more on the Lightroom or Photoshop side of things, but it's good that it's there. Everybody okay with that so far?
Yeah, I didn't know that about the colors.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, that's really good. I had no idea. So thank you for that.
So now from here, once that's done, I go ahead and click on save. Oh, so Bob Ianson says, when I import bracketed shots in HDR Efex Pro, they seem to become noisier than when they were separate files in Lightroom. Any file that you import into HDR, anything, Photomatics, Nik HDR Efex Pro, generally gets a little noisier, right? You're taking something that may have a little bit of noise and multiplying it with something that may have a little noise, with multiplying with something that may have a little bit of noise. So the more you multiply that kind of stuff, you'll start seeing that it starts getting a little noisier. That just happens. To combat that, I try to shoot as low as I can, low ISO shot. But at the end of the day, I don't necessarily mind having a little bit of noise in my HDR file. Sometimes I think that we obsess a little bit too much over the noise. You'd be surprised as to how much that noise is going to be very insignificant when you actually print it, or when you're viewing it at a specific viewing angle. To me, it's almost kind of tantamount to pixel peeping. That said, I tell people don't push or pull the files too much because you will see some of that stuff. The other thing that I usually tell people is that this file may not necessarily represent what it actually looks like when it's finished. And that's something that I see that in Photomatics, I see that in Photoshop, I see that in Nik HDR Efex Pro. What you see here may or may not be the best representation of what you're going to fully get. So just go into it with an expectation that it's going to be close, not exact. Once that's done, I'm going to go ahead and click on Save here. That's going to bring me right back into, in this case, because I opened it up inside of Lightroom, it's going to bring me inside of Lightroom. Now, the part that I hate, I can't figure out why they don't do this, but the part that I hate is I started with 4 files inside of a collection, I end it with 4 files inside of a collection. It doesn't dump the file back into the collection.
Yeah.
Bugs the snot out of me. I really wish it would just put it right back into the collection. So what I do as a tip is I just leave the file that I used initially selected and switch to all photographs. By doing that, it'll always put me right next to the file that I just processed. So it makes it a lot easier for me to find. From there, I can just go ahead and just drag it back into the collection and then just go right back to it.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, that's kind of odd because I actually use the Nik Silver FX, and it actually does stack the file back onto mine. But I'm using it on a PC though, not a Mac.
Yeah, it's really weird how it does it. It's just trippy. I can't find a consistent way to be able to kind of do it, but that's something that's just a pain. Now, from here, this is the file. No, that's not the file. This is the file that I was working with. So I'm going to call that 8. So now let's go ahead and just get rid of this. Now, this is something that you don't necessarily, here, I'll just do this. I'll go into my grid. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to show this in Finder. And I'm just going to drag a copy out to the desktop to do something later. But technically, inside of here, any color changes or shifts and things like that, I can do right in the Develop module. Inside of here, I can grab this and watch this. If I need to make a color change, I can make the color change here. If I need to make a tint change, I can make a tint change here. Exposure change, make it darker, I can do that here. Most importantly, the problem that I have here, I think, is oversaturation and over brightness. So what I'll do instead is I'll go right over to HSL and I'll take my saturation, this little targeted mark here, and I'll click and drag down. And you'll notice that as I drag down, it drops that saturation. I'm going to come over to the luminance. I'm going to click on that and drag that down. All I'm doing is dragging on this piece of wood because that's representative of what I want to work with. And in 2 seconds, I'm able to correct what I thought was a big problem when I was working in HDR Efex Pro. I can even go back into my tone curve and make myself a nice little contrast curve to kind of give me that kind of dark saturation of the file without necessarily shifting it into red. Now, if you're a Photoshop user, inside of Photoshop, you would be going to File, Open. You would select the file that you're working with. Because it's a TIFF, it's always going to show up as a format of TIFF. All you need to do is click on the drop down and switch it from TIFF to Camera Raw. But you have to do it in that order. You have to open the file, go to the TIFF image, then switch to Camera Raw. Once you do that, that TIFF file will open up in Camera Raw. Now you can take all your Camera Raw settings, the same thing that we did before. Exposure change, you can make an exposure change. If you want to be able to kind of make any kind of tone curves, if you want to make any detail things. If you want to be able to use hue saturation, you can go ahead and drop the saturation. You can drop your luminance. So exact same setups. If I find that I have a lot of noise inside of an image, I could always go right in here. You'll notice that this doesn't look as bad as I thought it was going to. I mean, it looks horrible if you go in at, 200%. But if I find that I have a noise issue, I could always go under my detail here and just use luminance noise reduction, which really does pull out a lot of that noise. I prefer luminance noise reduction right now over a lot of the noise products. You can find the same thing over here in the develop module. If you go down to the detail, this luminance noise reduction would be the place that I would go get it.
That does a bang up job.
Yeah, it's great. Look at that. It looks like I was clipping a little bit. So I would probably come over here and we just increase a little bit of fill light just to pull off some of those. Is that okay so far?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm not doing it inside of Photoshop, so I'm gonna can that. I usually do all my stuff inside of Lightroom. This is the file that I'm gonna work with. I'm gonna do a Command E or right click, edit in Photoshop CS 5.1. Now, before I do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of extraneous marks. So for me, since I'm in Lightroom, I'm going to crop. Like at the end of the day, I don't have a problem with cropping in a little bit to make the image a little bit better. What I would ask myself is, what does this right here have to do with anything? What does part of this window have to do with anything? So those are pieces that are just sitting there that are just like, they're all right. But they would be better if I would just get rid of them. So I'll hit my crop tool and holding down my shift key or clicking on this lock, I'll go ahead and I'll change the perspective or keep it locked to a perspective. Now, this is what I do from a cropping standpoint. You see those? Can you guys see those overlays?
Yes.
So I hit the letter O, and then what happens is that gives you the rule of thirds, diagonals, a triangle, the golden spiral. They're compositional aids to help you with making a composition.
I can post the picture on the.
Yeah, you could post it on the page.
Okay.
So in this instance, a golden spiral may not necessarily work, but in an image where you have angles, I tell people cycle by just hitting the letter O to find something that may work. If you do Shift O on one of these guys, it'll change the orientation. So for example, if you're using the spiral, watch this, Shift O moves the spiral. So use compositional aids to your benefit. In this case, this line that I have here, if I crop with that as an accent part, I can sell that line a little bit better. So watch this. I switch to this diagonal. The other thing that I usually do is I hit the letter L to bring me into lights dim mode, or even L further to bring me into lights out mode. That way I don't have anything else distracting me and I can just focus on getting the composition exactly where I want it. I can do my rotation tilt. You see this line right here? It's pointing to this thing. That looks pretty good. And it gives me a general idea of where I want to be able to compose. Once I do that, I hit the enter key and I hit the letter L and bring the lights up again. I still have this thing right here, so I'm just going to go ahead and just kind of zoom in, make it tighter, maybe bring this up a little bit more. There's the piece that I'm working on. Once that's done, right click, edit, and I'm going to go to edit inside of Photoshop. I'll edit a copy with these Lightroom adjustments. And we're off to work here. Inside of here, a lot of this work, I'm going to switch over to my Wacom tablet. So I'm using a Wacom tablet and I have a mouse. It comes with a mouse, so I use the mouse for the lion's share of everything. But when I'm doing retouching, a lot of the retouching, I switch right over to the pen and it just makes it so much easier. So what I want to do from here is, let's say that I want to add some detail. I'll come over to Filter, Nik Software, Sharpener. I use the pre-sharpener. You know, if you have Sharpener Pro, great. If you don't have it, you can use your own thing. You can use Unsharp Mask. You can use your High Pass. But I tend to buy into the entire Nik family, so I tend to use it. Watch this. Before, after, before, after, before, after. And literally, I don't touch anything else. You can use control points like they use them. I usually just go like this. 2 sliders. Move this way. Too much. Bring this down. Move this way. That looks pretty good. Click OK. There's my sharpening into the file. It takes it and it puts it into its own layer. So if at any point in time, if you want to mask out some portions of it, it's just a question of just applying a layer mask and merging it in. At this point, what I would do is I would take these 2 files, merge them together. Now, I don't see any kind of structural changes that I need to be able to make or lighting changes that I need to be able to make. If I really wanted to be kind of ornery about it, I could just come over here and go to my adjustments. I would make a curve adjustment and make this a little bit brighter. Right? I make it excessively bright. And then I take that curve adjustment and do a Command I to invert that mask from white to black. And then using a brush with a white color at a very low flow, I'll make it a little bit bigger and just kind of slowly paint in this piano or the organ. So watch. For me, the last thing that I would do is merge these 2 files. I do this to every image. Filter, Nik Software, Color Efex Pro. 4, and inside of here, I'll go ahead and, because remember, this is a moody image that I'm working with. So what I'll do is not midnight, but I'll use my Glamour Glow. I'll bring up the glow. It's a portrait effect, but I use it for HDRs. So I increase my glow, decrease the warmth, and then I increase my shadows and highlights so that it's a soft change. You'd be surprised as to how much just the processing of that actually kisses the file and makes it look kind of cool. Watch this. Before. Saves the image. After. Very subtle. You know, if I find that it messed up the organ a little bit too much, I'll just repeat that process, or I'll save that process. The curve that I did with the painting back in, I'll save that process until after I glowed the file. Once I have that all set, I'll take these files and I'll merge them together. Rather than vignette, I probably would even go back over to my Color Efex Pro, and in this case I would take the same file and then I would run something like Midnight, which is a very, very, very dark setting. I'll increase the shadows and I'll increase the highlights to not make it so bad. It's going to run this in its own layer, so I don't want to keep it just like that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom out a little bit. I'm going to add a mask that's white, and then I'm going to do a Command I to invert. With a really big brush, painting with white at a very low flow, I'm going to use the edges of the brush, not the center, but I'll paint right out here so that I use the transitional edge of the brush. And I'll softly just paint in some of that right into the image. So very, very light touches. Right, this pew has nothing to do with it, so just really, really tiny touches, because now it's not only is it a darkening thing, but it's also a depth of field thing because it's blurry. So that's going to kind of sell pointing into the center image. Again, if it darkens it too much, I could always just come back over here, just a small kick, invert it, with an adjustment layer, paint with white. And now watch this. I'd probably even come back over here and just make sure that I don't mess up this part of the organ, which I was missing. So before, after. I'll take these files, I'll merge them down, I'll save, and I'll close. Now we're here. So we'll take a look at, this is the original. All right, so that's the original. That's the tone mapped.
Nice.
Original, tone mapped. And we'll just do a side to side.
Nice. Pretty cool.
So that is pretty much it. I'll go ahead and stop sharing this. Questions, concerns, comments?
Posted my picture over there.
Oh, cool. Let me take a look.
Somebody else did too, I think.
Oh, there's Boris. Okay. Your black and white sections?
No, it's right there. No, it's...
Put the link in the chat, that'd be good.
Here you go.
Okay, here we go. Oh, there you go. Okay. Nice. And you did that while we were chatting. That's pretty cool.
Thank you.
Nice, nice. Ooh, nice.
That was like
Nice
that
summary.
was a nice tutorial there. Thank you for going over all that, taking the time to show us that.
Cool, man. No worries, man. Hey, happy to. Happy to. So
Thank you.
now I think that I was able to record this. So I think it's actually going to work okay. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to just close the recording and this hangout. And I'll take a look at the file. And if it processed okay, we'll go ahead and we'll upload it for you guys.
Thanks.
All right, guys. Thanks so much for stopping by. We'll see you guys later.
Are you gonna do anything about black and white silver effects class?
I may. It'd be a good thing to show. Yeah, I think it'll be cool.
I've been doing black and white for a whole month already.
Okay. Yeah, we'll check it out, man. Take care.
Bye-bye.
All right.
Marcy, thank you for putting this together and
Oh, no.
taking the time to do this.
No worries, man. No worries, man. Happy to. All right, bye.
Very useful, RC. Thank you. I loved your Santa Claus HDR as well.
Oh, thanks, man. Thanks. All right.
Awesome.
All right, bye.